Friends, in this concluding reflection, I thought I'd speak a little bit about all three parts of our course. Remember, the first part of our course was understanding the Qur'an, the second part, interpreting the Qur'an, and the third, exploring the relationship of the Qur'an to the Bible. So let's start with understanding the Qur'an. In that section of the course, we really focused on the theological nature of the Qur'an. Remember, this word theology literally means a word about God. And we spoke about the way that the Qur'an constantly elevates God, God who's sublime, who's transcendent. The Qur'an does this with the language it uses about God, God who's all-seeing, all-knowing, powerful, master of the day of judgment, quick to judge, possessor of revenge, and also, almost paradoxically, merciful and compassionate. But we saw that the Qur'an is not only interested in describing God, it's especially interested in speaking about the human response to God. In one place, it does this with Jesus. When the Qur'an has God ask Jesus, "Did you say to the people, take me and my mother as two gods apart from God?" That's in Surah 5, verse 116. It then has Jesus say, "Subhanaka, glory to you. Never would I say that which I have no right to say." The Qur'an also emphasizes the human response to God in the way that it tells punishment stories. These stories which repeat, stories about earlier peoples who rejected God and were destroyed. The Qur'an does that not to portray God as vengeful, but rather to ask its own audience to think about the fate of peoples gone by and to ask themselves, would they make the same decision of those who disbelieved and were destroyed? The Qur'an's interest in the human response to God is also seen in its vivid imagery. Its vivid imagery, for example, of heaven, heaven which is a garden, a verdant garden with rivers which flow beneath it. Its vivid imagery also in speaking about hell. For example, the Qur'an speaks about the Zaqum tree, this tree in hell which is the food of sinners, which will boil in the belly of sinners, which has fruit which is like the heads of demons. The Qur'an uses all of this to try to evoke a human response. We get the sense that the Qur'an is something like a homily, something like preaching, which seeks always to convince its audience of its fundamental message. Now, if the Qur'an is focused on the human response to God, it also uses general language in turns of phrase which allow many diverse interpretations of the text. And we saw that in the second part of the course. One way to illuminate that might be to think about those letters which are at the beginning of 29 different surahs of the Qur'an, letters which are known as mysterious letters because Islamic tradition is divided over their meaning. According to some interpretations, those letters have numerical values and could be added up to mean something. According to other interpretations, those letters are sounds which God used to summon the Prophet's attention. And according to still other interpretations, those letters were revealed by God, but the meaning of them was intentionally withheld, so they're truly mysterious letters. Now that's sort of a hypothetical example, but there are other examples that have maybe more practical importance. For example, when the Qur'an uses a turn of phrase such as, "God has set a seal on the hearts of unbelievers," how are we to understand that? Does that mean that God actually prevents unbelievers from repenting and believing because a seal is on their hearts? Or does that simply mean that the unbelievers themselves refuse to repent and believe? Or how are we to understand the Qur'an's passages where it speaks of non-Muslims, Jews, Christians, and others? There are some passages where the Qur'an seems to include Jews and Christians along with the believers, where it seems to suggest that the Jews and Christians will be along with the believers, admitted into heaven, that they need have no fear, they need not be sad. But then other passages seem to group non-Muslims with unbelievers. It seems to make them kuffar or infidels. How are we to understand that? We see indeed that even today, Muslim scholars interpret those passages in different ways. One thing that Muslim scholars, however, are agreed about is that the Qur'an is to be understood through the life of the Prophet Muhammad. That the proper way to read individual passages of the Qur'an is to link them to certain moments in the Prophet's life. And perhaps the most obvious way to explain this case is the way in which Qur'an chapter 17 verse 1, which speaks rather allusively about a journey which some servant of God took from the holy mosque to the further mosque. As we saw in that lecture which I gave from in front of the Dome of the Rock, Islamic tradition is very clear that this must be linked to a particular moment or incident in the Prophet Muhammad's life, when he was taken on this miraculous horse with wings, this winged beast, from the city of Mecca to the city of Jerusalem. In this course, however, we haven't followed the traditional way of reading the Qur'an always through the life of the Prophet Muhammad. In the third part of the course, in fact, we tried to set the Qur'an in its historical context. And we tried to look at the way it's related to the great scriptures of its historical context, or the most important scriptures, those of the Jews and Christians. And what we saw there is that the Qur'an tends not to be in relationship with the canonical Bible. Indeed, it seems never directly to quote from the Bible. There are only two passages which are close to a quotation. Instead, the Qur'an seems to be in conversation with the way that the Bible was being read in the 7th century in the Middle East, in the context in which it was proclaimed. Two examples might make that point. The first is the story of the prostration of the angels before Adam. Now, friends, nowhere in the Qur'an do we have a story of angels bowing down before Adam. But we do have that story in Christian texts that were written after the Bible, but before the Qur'an. Similarly, the way that the Qur'an speaks of the miracles of Jesus reflect the influence of those later traditions or texts. Some of the miracles of Jesus in the Qur'an, for example, healing lepers, are known from the Bible, but others are not. Among these is a story of how Jesus formed a bird from clay, breathed into the bird, and brought it to life. Now, this miracle is not known from the New Testament, but it is known from other Gospels written after the New Testament, Gospels known as apocryphal Gospels. Well, before concluding, I thought it's worthwhile also speaking about some of the things that I learned from you, because this truly was a two-way course. I did some lectures for you, but also I learned from you, from all of your contributions on the discussion forum. And there were two topics that I thought I might emphasize that were particularly interesting to me because I had not made them really a constituent or central part of the course. The first of these was a question of abrogation. Indeed, as many of you pointed out, according to Islamic tradition, there are certain passages in the Qur'an which were revealed later than other passages, in which abrogate or replace at least the legal force or the legal meaning of earlier passages. One way to explain this would be the case of wine. Now, everyone knows, of course, that according to most Muslim scholars, wine is prohibited, or alcohol generally is prohibited. But it's interesting to note that there are 3 different passages in the Qur'an which speak of wine. Only one of them is a clear prohibition. Islamic tradition, however, says that one was revealed last, and it replaces or abrogates the 2 passages which were revealed earlier. One might ask the question, however, is this theory of abrogation something suggested by the Qur'an itself? Or is it something that was developed by Muslim scholars in the course of their thinking about the Qur'an and their efforts to resolve certain tensions or maybe even contradictions within the Quranic text? One other theme that was principally discussed in the discussion forums is the question of the text of the Qur'an. Now, I mentioned in one lecture that the text that we have today of the Qur'an was the product of a project by the Ministry of Education in Egypt and was published in 1924. However, we also learned that in Islamic tradition, there were many different speculations about various ways of reading the text. Remember, the Qur'an in its earliest form was written in a simplified text that allowed for different readings. And in fact, there's a project in Berlin, Germany today, which is seeking to produce a critical Qur'an, one that will be based not on oral transmission, but rather on the evidence of ancient manuscripts. It will be interesting to see how that project develops, and if they will, in fact, produce a critical edition of the Qur'an that might give us an alternative to the standard Arabic text that we find today. Friends, there are other things I learned during this course, not only about abrogation and the text of the Qur'an, but also about the importance of academic conversation. I thought that it was truly remarkable the way such a large and diverse group of students came together during this course. In a time where there's tensions between different peoples in the world, and where religious questions are sensitive. We showed that through an academic approach, students are able to have a fruitful conversation that's intellectual, rigorous, open, and respectful. Friends, we're over 8,000 students from over 150 countries, and we work together as a community of learners. And I think that was extraordinary. And I also hope that your journey of learning doesn't stop here. And to that end, I thought I would suggest several readings that will help you continue with your exploration of the Qur'an and its relationship to the Bible. One of these is, of course, my own book, which I'd like to suggest again, The Emergence of Islam. You had some passages from this book in the course itself, but there are other passages that you can discover by buying the book, which might be of interest to you. A second book that might be interesting to you is The Qur'an, A Very Short Introduction by Michael Cook, a brief book, you can see how brief it is, which gives both information on the analysis of the text of the Qur'an and the history of Islamic understanding of the text of the Qur'an. I'd also like to suggest a particular translation of the Qur'an, that of Arthur Droge. This translation of the Qur'an gives not only a lucid presentation of the meaning of the Qur'an, but in its notes provides academic insights, both about the history of Islamic understanding of the text and the relation of the text to biblical tradition and Jewish and Christian literatures. Two other books I'd like to recommend. One is on the Qur'an specifically, that of Abdullah Saeed, entitled simply The Qur'an, an Introduction, which gives even more on Islamic thought about the text. And another by a Turkish scholar named Mustafa Akyol, Islam Without Extremes, which is a lucid introduction generally to the religion of Islam. Finally, friends, I thought it might be a nice way to end this course by highlighting some of your excellent contributions on the forum. There have been many brilliant insights that have not come from me, but from you, and here are some of the best.